maybe what is probably best is if I now address the key questions we got, and then I'll pause and take any questions you have at that time. So we received a number of requests about wayfinding, operational issues, wayfinding, fare dealers, and bus stop infrastructure. I'll deal with those first and then the other questions. The first was questions about improving the quality of signage and information for people coming off the ferry, particularly tourists, people that don't know the island and don't know their way around. We started to draft a wayfinding plan that could identify what the signage requirements are, and so we're happy to work with municipal staff on that and identify what might be possible, and also talk about how that would fit within your community, and particularly the funding for that and how it would be worked out with the community. We do have a method that we're using throughout the region. It's just beginning now, that allows us to partner with you on maps and directional signage and other information that you might want to put in the community. We were also asked whether...
Does wayfinding include going on the Translink website so I can type in Snug Cove and...
I'll talk about that actually a little bit more because there are some gaps there that also need to be addressed. So I'm thinking on this primarily the physical wayfinding, though clearly the other parts of trip planning, which are wayfinding, need to be addressed also. So we were asked about being able to buy transit fares on the island, passes and tickets. We'd be interested to know that the current fare system we have, that's a paper-based system, is only going to be in place for another few months. In 2013, it's being replaced with a smart card system. The Compass card is what we're calling it. This is similar to the kinds of fare systems that are now much more commonplace in many other cities. If you've been to London, you know about the Oyster card. If you've been to Hong Kong, you know about the Octopus card, that kind of a system. And the principal difference is that once a person owns a Compass card or has a Compass card, they can top it up any place and any time they want. So they can do it by going to the internet, they can do it at any one of our stations or exchanges at a machine, or they can do it at a station. And that kind of changes how people will buy fares in the future. So we'll be looking quite closely at what the distribution is for that in the coming months. And it will probably reduce the need for people to go to a physical shop on a weekly or monthly basis to buy tickets. But they will still need to go and get a Compass card in the first place. So I spoke with our fare dealer group, and they're also willing to work with a business on the island if they're interested in being a fare dealer to sell those in the future. And we can make those contacts available to you or to a business if they're interested. And then on the operational issues, the last point is about the bus stop infrastructure. There was a request to have perhaps more stops on the island. It is always a balancing act in a community like Bowen Island that doesn't have the characteristics of the city, that we offer some flexibility by having a flag stop system. You probably know that. So we're assuming you wouldn't want bus stops everywhere, but it suggested maybe at the key intersections that a bus stop might be a good idea. And so we're happy to work also with staff to find which locations.
Can you define what you mean by bus stop? Just one of those T signs?
Right, so a bus stop would involve, at a minimum, a pole with information describing what the routes are and how to contact Translink, and identity numbers so that people can get some information about the schedules. And then we always encourage municipalities to also provide a safe waiting area and a comfortable waiting area, so shelters if possible, certainly a bench, and a place to be out of the way of traffic. We have some guidelines on that we can share with you that can also help move along the way.
I think our request was as a minimum just to help the tourists so they know, because that's amazing number of people I've talked to that do not realize that their Translink bus service works on the island.
That's right.
So at the main corner at Artisan Square and maybe at Bowen Bay Beach, which is a public beach, a couple of those main spots
Okay, so we're happy to work with you on that and identify the opportunities. Then we were asked some other questions about service and the design of service and also the resources for transit. So on the question of maps and timetables, thank you for identifying those to us. We've now been able to identify some gaps in our system where information on printed timetables for West Vancouver, for example, doesn't include Bowen Island. Bowen Island is included in the online trip planner, so if you go online and try and make trips. But we also discovered that some of the locally known names for places aren't included in that. And it's actually quite easy for us to update that. So once again, we can work with staff to get a list of those names, put them in the system, and then people will be able to look them up and find when the trips are available.
Is it absolutely imperative that you work with staff rather than our ferry transportation advisory committee?
We can work with
overloaded?
We can work with whoever you would like us to work with. We were also asked to look at the quality of the connections with service at Horseshoe Bay, and this is somewhat challenging, but we certainly recognize the issue. One of the challenges for us is that ferry schedules change throughout the service day, and so it's difficult to make all the connections work. But maybe more importantly, we've also there's also recently been some changes in policy with BC Ferries to change the ticket purchase cutoff times. I'm sure you're more aware of that than I am. So I've asked my staff to look at how we can coordinate better with the ferry times and establish stronger connections with BC Ferries on that, and we can plan basically better coordination. We were asked about service flexibility and specifically the way that relates to the contract service. Firstly, on the service design itself, Bowen Island service is designed according to our standards for service in the region, reflecting the fact that it is a local service in a low density community. At the moment, we don't have all the tools that we would need to be able to make that service fully flexible or more flexible than it is today. So one very important thing that we're doing in 2012 and 13 is a regional strategy for transit that includes looking at methods of delivering service that are lower cost and more flexible in lower density communities. And we think that out of that we'll be able to find ways to make the service more flexible, including on Bowen Island. So in any contract service renewal that we would do, we would attempt to have language that certainly means that we wouldn't be precluded from doing that in the future. And so when each contract comes up for renewal at different times, we do that at the time of contract renewal. We were asked about the availability of data on transit ridership on Bowen Island, and at the moment, the operator on the island doesn't provide us ridership data on a regular basis. So that's something else to be addressed through future contracts. But another really important data gap was that our trip diary, which is a regional diary of people's travel patterns, didn't have full data from Bowen Island. In fact, there were a number of incomplete surveys, and the data on the whole wasn't all that useful to us. So we have undertaken a 2011 trip diary, the next round of that. And specifically for Bowen Island, we oversampled. We put in extra samples of Bowen Island residents to try and get a better idea of what the travel patterns on Bowen are. The analysis on that is still underway, but when that's released, we'll have a pretty good picture, at least a snapshot in time of what Bowen Island travel patterns are like. And that's for all travel modes. It's not about public transit.
So you don't have any statistics to give us today.
Not new ones. We should within a few months, but not today. We were also asked about service coverage. You recall on the map I showed that there were a number of neighborhoods identified as requests for service that don't currently have service. At the moment with the fixed route design that we have, it's difficult to serve other communities without stretching the service too thin. But we will look at what opportunities there are with more flexible service when we're able to do that. Likewise, we were asked to look at the size of the vehicles we use, do we need larger or smaller vehicles? Most of the minibus service or van-based service that we operate in the region has minibuses that have a maximum capacity of 24 passengers. Bowen Island, the demand is heavier, and so we've supplemented those with larger vehicles that carry 30 passengers. And to date, we found that on the whole, that is sufficient for the demand that we get.
How do you know if you don't have traffic statistics what the demand is?
Well, what we haven't received is any specific comments from the local operator about pass-ups on the island. Which would be pass-up, so if the bus arrives and there's not enough room on the bus, that would be a cue to us that there's something to look into and look at. We were asked about our handy dart service. So handy dart or custom transit is service for people who have physical or cognitive disabilities that mean that they can't use the conventional transit system. At this time, Bowen Island has very few registered handy dart users, and it's difficult for us to provide service for such a small base on the island. But one of the things we will look at as part of the more flexible service design is whether there is an opportunity to make the fixed route service or the standard transit service flexible enough to serve more people with disabilities who are on Bowen Island. Certainly our overall policy at Translink to provide as a highly accessible service for public transit in all modes.
And the handy dart's a small enough service that it goes up people's driveways and actually picks them up at their houses?
If they require that,
yeah.
That's right. The expensive service to provide, but it's provided for people who can't use the conventional system. And I think I've dealt with the last point there, which is about other service delivery models. So that concludes, one other thing. Oh no, we've talked about this, the flexible services. That is the opportunity. So that concludes the remarks I've prepared, and I'm really happy to take any questions that you might have for me at this time.
So you talked about funding major road networks. So what's the definition of how do you get to be defined as a major road to fit the major road network?
Yes, the major road network has a set of criteria which are largely around volume of vehicles, particularly goods movement. So it tends to be the busiest roads in the region. The ones that have a lot of goods movement, including trucking or other goods movement activities, as well as very high volumes of passenger.
So our road across the island wouldn't qualify?
It didn't the last time it was evaluated, so.
How far off were we?
I don't recall. I wasn't there.
So we could ask to have it evaluated?
Probably good idea if we provided you the criteria.
Yeah, that's what I was asking for. And then you talked you're talking about service optimization, and you referred to services that don't meet the minimum standards. Can you tell us what the minimum standards are?
So we have various different ways of measuring minimum productivity, but for the purposes of our conversation, it's usually measured in some way related to the number of people who get on and off the service within an hour of service.
Boardings per hour?
Boardings per hour or capacity utilization rates. There are other measures as well, but it's probably okay for this conversation. The kinds of service levels that we would expect are typically 20 boardings per hour or more, and we've been looking at services that are less than that. That said, we also, these are not hard and fast rules, and so we also look at other aspects of the service, including peak utilization, whether a service is the only service in the community or not. You may know that Translink is working diligently to reduce its cost and improve our overall performance as an organization. We have a regional transportation commissioner who makes comments every year. He made observations about that. The provincial government has also ordered an audit of Translink, which is underway now. And so we expect to continue to be under scrutiny for the productivity of our services. And we also expect in the region to be talking about the other trade-offs that are made, including the necessity of basic transportation in our communities and the need to fund transportation for that, for those purposes. So in the coming year, I expect more conversation about Translink level of productivity or level of efficiency to provide service to small niche markets, as well as the importance of that as a lifeline for communities that don't have other transport alternatives.
And on when you were doing the North Shore review, did Lions Bay have somebody who came to the technical advisory committee and sat on it?
So, very challenging, I know, for small communities to participate in planning processes like this. They are quite time intensive. So to the extent that staff were able to come to those, we were grateful. When they weren't able to attend, we tried to reach out, sometimes with conference calls, which we held a number of times in the process, and always provided the written material to the staff for review. But we know that small communities, Bowen and Lions Bay in particular, did have a difficult time participating fully.
And my last question, I guess, has to do with double barrel related to the survey on the website and the information. So do you have a separate tabulation that you could give us of the input that you received at the general store? So we know what the issues the Bowen community was asking about during that that May 19th session? And can you tell, was there a question on the survey, I can't remember, on the website that asked where you lived?
Surveys almost invariably ask where you live.
So you could tell us what the Bowen population said on the survey.
Right. So we will publish everything that we received in that. It'll all be on our website in due course. Some of it may already be there. I haven't checked recently, but if it's not there now, it will be there within.
But by community specific, so that we would know what the Bowen Island people said on May the 19th.
You will know what was said at the meeting on the 19th, not necessarily if everyone was from Bowen, but also if Bowen Island residents participated in one of the other meetings, that would come out
so
there.
We would know what the Bowen people said distinct from what everybody said.
I don't know that for sure.
So that's what I'd really like to know, is what everybody, whether they were from Bowen or off island, but what was said at the meeting on the 19th, which largely would be Bowen people, and what was said by people who said they lived on Bowen in the survey, just so we know what the community issues are.
Yeah, we'll have a look and see to the extent we can pull it out. We can certainly identify all the comments that came about specifically Bowen Island, or Horseshoe Bay, or West Vancouver, which are probably in sort of descending order the most relevant to your community.
But,
but we also know that people in the region have transportation interests throughout the region. So Bowen Island residents will often talk to us about transit service elsewhere if they're traveling on the North Shore or in Vancouver. A lot of people have interest in transit to the airport and other workplaces or destinations in the region. So it's usually a mixture of comments we get.
and have you any way of telling how many people ride the 250 or the 257 that are from Bowen? I mean, do you survey those passengers that get on those buses?
No. So the way Translink looks at transportation in the region, we plan transportation as a region, and municipal boundaries mean relatively little in how, because municipal boundaries mean relatively little in how people travel around. So we don't typically ask a person where they're from when they get on the service, except to know regionally what their origins and destinations are.
Well, I guess our big issue is there's three ferries that feed Horseshoe Bay, only one of which pays taxes to Translink. Langdale doesn't, and Nanaimo doesn't.
Well, the customers who use those services are a mix of people who are from the region and who are not from the region. So Translink views customers as customers, regardless of where the origin of the trip is, and recognize that that a large share of the people who ride the services to and from the ferry terminals, both at Tawasin and Horseshoe Bay, live in the region as well. So we tend to respond to demand, but we also recognize that that the Bowen Island Ferry is part of the regional transportation system, and so that's important to us also.